A few weeks ago, the most advanced underwater search fleet on Earth finished scanning the floor of the southern Indian Ocean. Robots that can map a coin at 4,000 meters, months at sea, and they came home with nothing. 12 years, 4 search campaigns, more than $250 million, 239 people, and the largest object ever lost by modern civilization, a Boeing 777, 64 meters of aircraft, is still missing. But here is what almost nobody watching the news understands. The searchers are not lost. They are not guessing anymore. The math that tracks MH370 has been narrowed, refined, and cross-checked for a decade, and what's left of it fits inside one final box of ocean, 7,428 square kilometers. The ships are under contract to finish it. Malaysia has signed the extension. $70 million sits waiting, paid only if they find it. The contract runs out on June 30th, 2027. So this is no longer an infinite mystery. It is a countdown. And to understand why everything now depends on one patch of abyss the size of a small country's county, you have to understand why every search before it looked in the wrong place, including the one that just ended. March 8th, 2014, 12:41 in the morning, Kuala Lumpur. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 lifts off for Beijing. 227 passengers, 12 crew. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, 18,000 hours, and First Officer Farik Hamid, flying his final training sector on the 777. For 38 minutes, it is the most boring flight in the sky. Cruise at 35,000 feet, clear night. At 1:19 a.m., Kuala Lumpur Control hands the flight to Vietnam, and someone in the cockpit answers with 5 words that became the most analyzed radio call in aviation history. Good night, Malaysian 370. 2 minutes later, over the exact scene where Malaysian airspace ends and Vietnamese airspace begins, the one point where no controller is quite responsible, the transponder goes dark. The aircraft vanishes from every civilian radar screen in Southeast Asia. Vanishes from civilian screens. Military radar kept watching, and what it recorded is the reason this case never closed. The aircraft did not fall. It turned. Hard left, back across the Malay Peninsula, tracking the airway boundaries, up the Strait of Malacca, past the island of Penang, where the data shows one detail that still stops investigators cold. A curve consistent with someone looking down at Penang, the captain's home island. Then, at 2:22 a.m., beyond the range of the last military radar head, MH370 walks off the edge of the observable world. Every camera, every radar, every system built to track aircraft, beaten. But one machine nobody thought of as a tracking device was still quietly talking to the plane. A satellite, parked over the Indian Ocean, doing something as mundane as a phone checking for signal. And that accident of engineering is the only reason we know where to look at all. The aircraft's satellite terminal had been switched off, and then, at 2:25 a.m., it logged back on. Nobody knows why. A power interruption ending, a system rebooting. Either way, for the next 6 hours, an Inmarsat satellite pinged MH370 once an hour, like a phone tower asking, "Are you still there?" And the aircraft answered. 7 times. The pings carried no position, no altitude, no speed, no words. Just 2 numbers buried in the signal. How long the message took to travel, which draws a ring on the Earth's surface for each ping, and a frequency shift that hints at how fast the aircraft moved along those rings. 7 pings, 7 rings, and the rings marched steadily south, into the emptiest stretch of ocean on the planet. The seventh and final handshake, 8:19 a.m., as the sun rose over the southern Indian Ocean, was different. It was a log-on request, the kind the terminal sends after losing power. The signature of an aircraft whose engines have flamed out, one after the other, 7.5 hours after takeoff, exactly when the fuel would have run dry. That final ring is called the seventh arc. Somewhere along it, a 777 with no thrust came down out of the morning sky. Every search since 2014, every sonar pass, every submersible dive, has been a bet on where along that arc. And that is where this stopped being a mystery about an airplane and became a mystery about mathematics. Because the arc is thousands of kilometers long, and the bets have now failed 4 times. To see why the 5th bet is different, you need to watch the first ones fail. Bet 1, 2014, acoustic pings. Ships chased underwater pulses thought to be the black box's locator beacons, near where analysts first crunched the arc. 2 months. The pings turned out to be, almost certainly, the ship's own equipment echoing back. The box's batteries died while the world listened to ghosts. Bet 2, 2014 to 2017, the big one. Australia led the deepest, most expensive underwater hunt ever attempted. 120,000 square kilometers of seabed mapped along the arc, $160 million. The search area was built on one load-bearing assumption. After the final turn south, nobody was flying. A ghost flight, autopilot on, crew unresponsive, straight line until flameout, steep spiral down close to the arc. 3 years. Mountains, canyons, and shipwrecks no human had ever seen. No aircraft. Stop for a moment on bet 2, because it is the one that swallowed 3 years and $160 million, and it is the one that contains the mistake. To search for a wreck, you first have to decide how the aircraft came down. That single decision sets everything. How wide your corridor is, how far from the arc you sweep, how many square kilometers you can afford. Australia made that decision in 2014. They assumed nobody was flying. It was not an unreasonable guess at the time. A ghost flight, crew incapacitated, autopilot holding a straight line south, engines starving, one after the other, and then a steep, uncontrolled spiral into the water, close to the 7th arc. That model gives you a narrow band. A narrow band is searchable. A narrow band fits a budget. So the ship swept a corridor hugging the arc, 1,200 kilometers long, tight, and empty. Now here is the sentence that should have changed the search, and did not. In July 2018, Malaysia published the official safety investigation, the Annex 13 report, the legal record of what happened to Flight 370. And in it, the investigators state what the radar track had implied for 4 years. The turn back over the peninsula was not a malfunction. It was executed under manual control. Someone's hands were on the aircraft. Read those 2 things next to each other. The official record says a human being flew that aeroplane away from its route. The search area was designed on the premise that no human being was flying it at the end. Both cannot be the operating assumption. Only one of them was searched, and the gap between them is not academic. It is measured in kilometers of ocean. A Boeing 777 at 35,000 feet that loses both engines does not fall. It glides. With nobody at the controls, it will eventually spiral in. That is the ghost flight model, and it lands the wreck close to the arc. But with someone holding the wings level, that same aircraft can travel more than 100 nautical miles past the point where the fuel ran out. Almost 200 kilometers of ocean in any direction around a circle. That is the difference between a corridor you can sweep in 3 years and a ring of ocean the size of a country. And Australia knew it. The ATSB modeled controlled glide scenarios. The possibility is written into their own analysis. They did not ignore it. They simply could not afford it. Searching for a pilot who glided means searching an area many times larger, and nobody was going to fund that. So a decision about money was recorded as a decision about probability. The narrow box was not where the evidence pointed. It was where the budget reached. This is the correction that reframes 12 years of headlines. Every anniversary, the story is written the same way. They searched an area the size of Greece and found nothing. So the ocean is simply too big. That is not what happened. They searched a small, precise, confident slice of it, and the confidence came from an assumption the official report itself contradicts. They did not search the wrong ocean. They searched the wrong assumption. Which is why the next attempt matters. Because the company that tried after Australia did not inherit their premise. It inherited their failure. And it came back anyway. Bet 3. 2018. Ocean Infinity's first attempt. New robots. Another 25,000 square kilometers north along the arc. No find, no fee. Nothing. Which forces the conclusion the official reports only whisper. The plane was never in the ghost flight box. And the strongest evidence for that had been washing up, quietly, on the beaches of Africa the whole time. In July 2015, a piece of wing, a flaperon encrusted with barnacles, landed on Réunion Island. Then more pieces, Mozambique, Tanzania, Madagascar, South Africa. Over 30 fragments confirmed or judged likely from MH370. The debris proved two things. The aircraft ended in the southern Indian Ocean. The conspiracy theories died on that beach. And the timing of where and when the pieces arrived became data. Oceanographers ran the currents backwards, like rewinding smoke, and the drift models kept pointing to a crash zone north of where the ships had been looking. So the arc says one thing, the drift says another refinement, and the wreckage on the seabed still says nothing at all. Enter the strangest witnesses in this entire file, and I mean witnesses that were bolted to the plane. The barnacles. Barnacles grow their shells in layers, like tree rings, and each layer locks in the chemistry of the water it grew in. Warm water, one signature; cold water, another. The barnacles riding the flaperon had been growing since the day the wreck hit the water. Read the shells from the inside out, and you get a travel diary of the debris. Which waters it drifted through, in what order, for how long. Scientists who analyzed them found the oldest layers grew in water warmer than the cold latitudes of the main search zone. Another finger pointing north along the arc. But here is the part of that story that belongs on this channel. The full analysis. The one that could have narrowed the crash latitude using the largest, oldest barnacles was never completed. Some of the biggest specimens were never released for study. A French judicial hold, custody chains, institutional friction. 11 years later, shells that may encode the crash coordinates sit in storage. And that is the true shape of the MH370 problem in 2026. It was never one mystery. It is a stack of unfinished analyses. Radar, arcs, drift, barnacles, debris damage. Each one narrowing the box a little more, none of them finished loudly. Stack them all, and they overlap on one region, the arc between roughly 33 and 36 degrees south, a band the previous searches clipped the edges of, but never fully covered. Which brings us to the two men whose names you should know, because the current search area is, to a remarkable degree, their homework. And one of them spent years being dismissed as obsessed. Independent researchers never let this case go. retired engineers, aerospace scientists, a loose global network the press calls the independent group. People who spent their own years re-deriving Inmarsat's math, testing it against debris drift, against aircraft performance, against the military radar track. One of them, British engineer Richard Godfrey, went further into the unconventional. He mined a global network of amateur radio signals, WSPR, arguing that a 777-sized aircraft crossing those signal paths leaves faint, recoverable disturbances. Mainstream scientists remain split on the method, but his derived flight path lands inside the same band the drift models and the arc math already favored, around 29 to 36 south. Different tools, same box. Ocean Infinity, the company that ate the 2018 failure, came back to Malaysia in 2024 with a proposal built on exactly this convergence zone. New ships, new autonomous fleets that scan in packs, same brutal contract, no find, no fee. They burn their own millions unless the wreck appears, and collect 70 million if it does. The 2025-26 season searched most of the new priority zones, fighting the roaring 40s. Waves that stack like buildings, weeks of survey lost to weather. They found geology, volcanic ridges, fields of debris-sized rock that light up sonar like wreckage and take days to rule out, one contact at a time. And then, this summer, the season ended, empty. So the news wrote the story you probably saw. Another failure. Mystery endures. Maybe it's simply unfindable. That is the comfortable reading. It is also mathematically backwards, because every square kilometer cleared doesn't dilute the search, it concentrates it. 12 years of elimination have squeezed all the remaining probability into what has not yet been scanned. And what has not yet been scanned now has a number: 7,428 square kilometers. Here is what's actually inside it, and why the people who drew it think the plane is there. On June 29, 2026, Malaysia's cabinet signed the extension. Ocean Infinity gets one more contract year, July 1, 2026 to June 30, 2027, to finish the designated area, the remaining unswept portion. 7,428.54 square kilometers. Understand what that patch of ocean is like. 4,000 meters down, the cruising altitude of an airliner in reverse. Underwater mountain ranges, silt that swallows metal. The broken terrain the earlier passes deliberately skipped because it was too hard to scan, which is precisely why the wreck could be sitting in it, invisible to every pass that went around it. A 777 that hit the water hard is not a plane down there. It is a debris field, maybe the size of a few football pitches, gray on gray, in country the size of a small nation. And the calendar is crueler than the geography. The southern Indian Ocean allows serious survey work only in its summer window. This contract year, Ocean Infinity's primary ships are committed elsewhere from November to April. They return for the final window in the autumn of 2027, which does not exist. The contract dies June 30th. What is really left is a handful of workable months, split across 2 seasons, to clear the hardest terrain of the entire 12-year hunt. Before the ending, the question this case always comes down to, and I want it in the comments: if the last 7,428 square kilometers come up empty too, does that mean the math was wrong? Or that someone flew the aircraft beyond the math? A controlled glide past the arc that no drift model can fully reconstruct. Pilots and engineers split hard on this one. Pick a side. Because this was never about coordinates. It is about the 2 recorders bolted into the tail. If the fleet finds the debris field, Submersibles will go down for the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. After 12 years at 4,000 meters, the tape's survival is genuinely uncertain. But recorders have come back from deeper and from longer. Air France 447's boxes surfaced after 2 years under the Atlantic and gave up everything. What would they answer? The only question that has ever mattered. Who was flying and why? The depressurization theories, the fire theories, the hijack theories. The captain, whose home flight simulator, the FBI found, contained a deleted route into the southern Indian Ocean, a detail Malaysia confirmed only after it leaked. A recorder could turn 12 years of inference into a verdict: murder-suicide, catastrophe, or something no one has guessed. And if the boxes are mute, the wreckage itself testifies. Flap positions reveal whether hands were flying at the end. The debris already recovered hints at it. Damage patterns on the flaperon and flap that several analysts read as not fully deployed. A ghost flight to the very end, or the opposite, depending on whose report you trust. The seabed settles it. 239 families have lived 12 years inside that unsettled argument. Grace Nathan, whose mother was in seat, she has stood at every press conference since 2014, saying the same sentence in different words. We are not asking for a miracle. We are asking them to finish the map. The extension to 2027 is the first time the finishing of the map has an official date. So here is where the file stands this week. The ships have gone quiet for the storm season. The contract clock is running. On the far side of the summer, the fleet returns for the last window, the final months of the final year of the final designated search area. 7,428 square kilometers between 239 families and an answer. 3 endings are now possible, and only 3. They find it, and the recorders speak, and the longest-running mystery in modern aviation gets a cause, a name, maybe a trial of the truth itself. They find it, and the deep has erased the tapes, and we get coordinates, a debris map, a partial verdict written in bent metal, an answer with a hole in it. Or June 30th, 2027 arrives. The area is clean, the fee goes unpaid, and the question mutates into something worse. Because if the plane is not in the box that 12 years of mathematics built, then the math was wrong, or the aircraft was flown to defeat it, on purpose. Past the arc, past the models, into ocean no contract has ever covered. Somewhere tonight, 4,000 meters down, in the dark it has owned for 12 years, there is either a debris field waiting inside 7,428 square kilometers, or the greatest vanishing act in the history of machines. 1 year on the clock. The ocean knows which.